Episode 54 of the Late Night Vision Show. Y'all, welcome back. We're glad to have you. As always, I'm glad to have my good buddy Jason from Outdoor, the owner of Outdoor Legacy Gear. How you doing, bud?
Man, I'm doing great. How are you tonight, Hans?
We have not talked about the fact that we have new intro music. I mean, it's
We
been a whole
do.
year. We hadn't even mentioned it yet, but I know everybody knows this because they listen and they watch on YouTube. But we
That's
have
right.
new intro music, and it
When,
sounds
when
awesome.
when did we debut that for I think it was on the 1 year anniversary. We didn't even
was-
talk about
yeah.
it. Yeah, we did.
It was 2 weeks ago, and anytime we want to make a change to anything like this, it takes you and I forever to decide on it. But
I think you asked me on the third episode if I could find some new music, and it took about 49 more, but I got it.
But I tell you what, it is. I've gotten a lot of compliments on that, and they're like, "Man, that sounds like some good Texas country Southern rock
That's
music."
right.
So we will try not to wait another 52 episodes to get that changed out.
No promises.
No promises, no promises at all. Well, thank you all for joining us again this week. We've got a very interesting topic. We're going to take it kind of back to the basics with the thermals. Jason, as you know, a lot of people are calling you on a daily basis talking about their step into thermal for the first time, what to do, what to look for, and they really seem to get confused around a lot of terms that are being thrown around, and it is hard to understand, and it is complicated at times.
It is, and I think that we're going to jump into this topic. I think this is something that hopefully will help a lot of people. It is something that I know we both get asked from time to time. Well, I'll say from time to time, very often, almost daily on the phone. Talking to people again about their first time considering thermal optics. There's not quite as much confusion around digital night vision optics. There's not quite as many terms to be thrown around, and so we're not trying to single out just the thermal guys, but there is it is a lot of confusion here. So we're just going to kind of go over some of the basics and explain them and what these terms mean. And I know that a lot of people won't probably admit it, but there's probably a lot of guys that use thermal and have owned thermal for a long time and maybe don't quite understand these things. And what we're here to do today is to not give you the textbook answer that you could go look up on your own and probably wouldn't understand. We're here to break it down for you in the Hans and Jason backwoods East Texas redneck Southern boy way of understanding it. Maybe that's called layman's terms everywhere else, but
Well, you're gonna have to write it out for me in crayons then.
I know that's right. I'll get you some crayons and a coloring book. But no, so let's just jump into some of these different terms and topics, and we're gonna kind of flesh some of these out. And I think when we get, we'll see how this lays out. We may do it as we go, or maybe when we get towards the end, we'll be able to come in here and kind of explain how these different things work together. So I am going to jump right in and let's talk about the resolution. And every time you look up any thermal scope, if you look it up on a product page on like Outdoor Legacy Gear, or you listen to our reviews or somebody else's, they talk about the resolution. Mm-hmm. So let's just define here. There's two basic different resolutions, and you've got what I call standard resolution, and that's going to be anything in the 300 range on the wide side, the horizontal side. And then you've got what I call high resolution, and that's going to be 640 by 480. And currently on the consumer thermal market, there is no thermal core that has a resolution higher than 640 by 480. Now, before we jump into this anymore, I want to say the thermal core, let's explain quickly what that is. That is actually the sensor that is in the scope that is actually sensing that heat and then transferring that image towards the display. So without getting more complicated, we can just call it an image sensor, and that's the brain. That's the most important thing. It's a very expensive component, and that is really where the whole scope is built around, is that thermal core. So 640 by 480 is high resolution. Go ahead, Hans.
So I feel like a lot of people understand and know what resolution means. I think they feel like they hear it a lot in their daily lives, whether it be people talking about when they go buy a new TV, it's resolution 1080p or what
Right.
on their iPads, or they hear that a lot with a lot of electronics. I think the question is why, and I'm going to tell you what, I'm going to knock your train right off the tracks.
Oh, no.
The whole show. I'm laying traps the whole time, but I'm asking, why is, and we may not know this, but is there ever a point where we could get to a 1080 thermal resolution scope, or are we stuck? Right now 640 is the best. Can we get any higher than that?
You have taken my train and you have put a sidetrack right where I was headed somewhere else. But okay, here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna come back and answer that. We're gonna circle back and I'm gonna answer that in just a minute. That is a very good question. So let's go back and talk about these two resolutions that we have now, and then we'll talk about the future. So I don't think there's a whole lot to say about 640 by 480. It is what it is. It's the highest resolution that you can get in a thermal scope right now on the consumer market in the hunting world. So it is what it is. And then if you go down, you've got a lot of different options. You've got, say, the new Pulsar, their new thermal core. That's going to be, it's out in the Axions, will be coming out in the Thermions. It's going to be a 320 by 240 pixels. Then currently the Pulsars are at 384 by 288 pixels. FLIRs are at 320 by 256. So you can see all those are very similar. A little bit of difference on the horizontal and the vertical resolution, but really close. And again, we're going to get into a little bit later on about, is there really a difference in 384 and 320? But with that said, the thing that I want you to understand is that when you hear these terms, it's the thermal core. Now, here's where a lot of people get confused, and I hear this on the phone sometimes, is a guy will say, well, wait a minute, that scope's 1024 by 768. It says it right here. It says that that's what the display is. Well, that's the display. That's the screen. That's like your TV, okay? So you could have a 640 by 480 scope or thermal core, let's say in theory, and they could put a cheap, low-end, tiny little resolution, say it's a 240 by 122, display. Well, you wouldn't get quality because you've got a terrible, screen that you're looking at. So that is why they put high resolution displays most of the time where possible. Again, it's going to be normally somewhere around, a 968, a 978, a 1024, whatever. So don't get that confused. Yes, it is important, but most all of the current thermal scopes on the market and handhelds and that sort of thing are going to have a good display. And we'll talk about the displays a little bit more in a minute if we get there. But so let's go back to, well, hang on. Before we do, let me just clear this up. What is the difference in a 320 or a 384 and a 640? It's simply like it sounds. It's more pixels. It's higher resolution. So what you're going to get, generally speaking, assuming all other things equal, is you're going to get a better image quality. Right. A 640 is just going to be crisper and clearer because there are twice as many pixels as there is in a 320 by 240. So no different than your TV. And now there comes a point of diminishing returns. So we can take a TV as an example, and you may have a 1080p and somebody's got a 4K, and maybe I'm just talking out loud here because I don't have a big fancy TV like that, but I know sometimes you get to the point where I can't really tell that much of a difference. That's not the case when you're dealing with something like 320 versus 640. There is an absolute noticeable difference, and I know you'll agree with that, Hans.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah. So to the sidetrack that Hans mentioned, why don't we have something above 640? Why don't we have a 1024 by 768 or something thermal core? The answer to that is that I think it's coming. It's coming down the road. The problem has been in the past that those thermal cores were just too large to put into a thermal scope. Also very expensive, but they were just big thermal cores. And from what I'm understanding, some of the thermal manufacturers are working on some cores and getting them in that smaller size. And I have heard a few things that, speculation from some of the manufacturers. I think it's coming. I think it's coming sooner than later. I don't know that it'll be next year. I don't know that 2020 is the year for it. But I will be very surprised in the next, I don't know, 1 to 3 years, 2 or 3 years, if we don't see a 1024, I'll be kind of surprised. I really think it's coming. I don't know. That's crystal ball in it, but that's my guess. So
Right.
it'll be interesting when we do, or if we do, for sure. So
Definitely.
yeah, moving along, I do want to talk about the different types of displays. You'll hear this a lot. You'll hear it's got an OLED. A lot of times we call that an OLED display, or an AMOLED, AMOLED. You'll hear LCOS, that's liquid crystal over silicone. FLIR has an FLCOS. I don't know exactly what the F stands for. Then there's LCD. Those are the basic and most common displays that you're going to find. Now, again, the display, that is what your eye is actually looking at. That's the little screen inside the scope. Anything right now in the OLED or the AMOLED, those are the best, generally speaking. That is the newest technology. The AMOLED is what Pulsar uses, and that is a step forward from a standard OLED. Sometimes you'll find like these FLCOS that FLIR use are actually a higher resolution than these OLEDs, and so then you start getting into splitting hairs of which one is better, because one's got higher resolution and one's a better technology. It's not a liquid crystal, so for whatever all that's worth, this is the basic. LCD is old. A true just plain LCD, that's going to be something that's in normally a 3 to 4 year old scope, and it will not be as good of an image produced on that screen as anything in the OLED or the somewhat newer, LCOS, liquid crystal over silicone. So that's that. If you hear that and you hear OLED, just always know that's going to be really good. That's going to be newer technology. Moving along, we've got pixel pitch. Now, most people don't know what pixel pitch is. A lot of people have never even heard of it. But what they have seen is they've seen or heard guys like us talk about the microns. And we'll say, oh, it's 17 microns or it's 12 microns. And people go, what is that? And this is something that is confusing. So I'm going to explain it in the simplest way that I can. And my understanding of it is actually pretty simple too. I'm not an electronic engineer or anything, and that's obvious. I don't think anybody needed me to state that, but just in case you were concerned. So what this is a micron is actually a micrometer. It is a measurement. Okay, so a micron isn't anything magical. It's like an inch or a centimeter. It's a type of measurement. And sometimes you'll see this listed with these funny little symbols that look kind of like a U and an M. And again, those are goofy little symbols, but that basically means the microns. And what that is measuring is what is called pixel pitch. And pixel pitch is simply this. It is the measurement from the center of one pixel to the center of the next door neighbor pixel. So if you take again, we're talking about the thermal core. So if you take a thermal core that is 640 by 480, and you take one pixel and you measure from it from the center of it to the center of the next pixel, that gives you that whatever that measurement is in microns, that's what we would say. It's 17 microns or 12 microns. So what that means in layman's terms is it's really measuring the distance or the space that's between those pixels. So the tighter and the closer that they are together, the better your image quality is going to be. So, for instance, it wasn't just a few years ago, maybe 3 years ago, a lot of scopes were 25 microns. And so that's a big difference in 17 and 12 microns. And when we started seeing 17 microns, man, the image quality started getting better and better. And, 12 microns is now it's what, FLIR is, it's what Trigicon is, Envision. Again, Pulsar is going to that. So, that is what it is. It's the measurement, basically, of the space between the pixels. And the smaller the number, the better. Currently, on the consumer market for thermal scopes and handhelds, 12 microns is as small as you're going to get. And the experts that are way smarter than me, they say that anything less than 12 microns is basically undetectable by the human eye. I don't know that for a fact. I've never looked at one that's smaller than 12, but I've had a lot of very smart people that have always confirmed. They've just said, hey, when you get into the 10s, the 9s, it really is not going to do you any good. It's not going to be a big difference. Now, I'm telling you that now, and in 2 years when there's a 10 micron, we'll be ranting and raving about it. I'm just telling you what I've been told. So that's what that is. The micron, again, is just a measurement, and all you need to know is that in today, 2019, 17 microns going down to 12 microns is the industry standard. I think. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say the Nuke, not the Nuke. I'm jumping way ahead of you. The Micron level is one thing that is very, I think, confusing to most people, because you always think the larger the number, the better.
Right.
And it's actually the complete opposite with the Micron. So, when they call in, they ask about, the difference between 12 and 17 microns, and they say, well, yeah, but this one's got 17 microns, and well, actually, that's not as good as the 12. But yeah, it is. It's switched around. It's reversed. Lower the number, the better the picture quality, typically. So
yeah, it is. Thing. And so again, this is what I tell people: you really don't have to know what it means. Just know that lower is better.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with 17. Again, we're going to 12. I think after all these new thermions come out, basically most everybody, I don't know about ATN, I don't know what they're running, but everybody else, all the big players of the good scopes in the market are all going to be running 12 microns mostly. That's going to be their main models. There will be some obviously at 17. So lower the number, the better. And that's all you need to worry about. Now, moving along, I want to talk about the Nuke. And that is something that a lot of people call me, that they buy a thermal scope from me. They've never used one, never looked through one. And it's something maybe we just didn't get to talk about on the phone, or I forgot to mention. They'll get it and they'll call and they'll say, hey, something's wrong with my scope. Oh, what's wrong with it? Man, I turn it on and it looks great, but about every 30 seconds or so, the screen locks up and it clicks, and then it comes back, and I don't know what's going on. Well, that is what we call the Nuke, NUC, and that is an acronym for some really big, long words that I don't even remember offhand.
Right, I've never even tried to understand what it is, but it's easier just to say Nuke.
Exactly, say Nuke. Other thing can be called is a thermal refresh. And what it is this, and this is going to be a cheesy way of explaining this, but again, it's the way that I can understand it. So if you take a thermal core and you're looking through your scope and you're looking through that core, all the time there are little artifacts and things that you are looking at, and they're burning into that thermal core temporarily. Okay, it's not permanent. But so if you're looking at, this is one way you can see this. If you turned the Nuke off and you pointed your scope at a tree, and you looked at that tree for 45 seconds or so, didn't move it, and then you look at something else, what you'll see is a ghosted image of that tree on your screen. You'll still see everything else, but it's kind of like it's something smeared in there between you and what you're seeing. You'll see a ghosted image of that tree. And that's because it is sat there and it has burned into that thermal core. And so what the refresh does, or the Nuke, is it wipes it. And I like to think of it as kind of like when you were a kid and you had an Etch-a-Sketch and you would take that thing and draw all over it, and then you take it and shake it up and it's just, clean magic. Same thing with the thermal core. It stops, and a lot of times you can hear the audible click. The screen will lock up for a second, and boom, it comes back, and your screen is clear. Now, if the automatic nuke or automatic refresh is doing what it's supposed to do, you won't really notice that image got any noticeably better. All right. But if you turn that refresh to a mode where you're in charge of it, you have to press the button to make it do it, you will notice it, because now you're getting into, you're going to be using it. And if you don't ever press it, it's going to get darker and darker as more little artifacts and things start burning in. And that image is really going to degrade. You press the refresh button, boom, it's going to lock up for 1 second. It's going to come right back. Now, there's different kinds of refreshes. I don't really want to get into all that, but generally speaking, most scopes come set to automatic. And then you've got some thermal cores like the FLIR that they have a very quick refresh. It's something that you hardly even see. It's just a quick little flash. The Pulsar, they use a ULIS core, which is a different brand core, and they take longer when they refresh it. It's a click, and it's 3/4 of a second, and then your screen comes back. So everything locks up there. You can leave them in automatic mode, and the Optic will refresh whenever it senses that it needs it. If you set it into a semi-automatic or a manual mode, depending on what the manufacturer calls it, it really puts you in charge of it. Now, I can't not mention this here, but we need to talk about the fact that, and this has been mentioned on this show and other places, but scopes like the Trigicons and the Envisions, they have a BAE, which is a brand, thermal core. Those thermal cores have to be manually refreshed. They do not have an automatic refresh, and it is an old style manual refresh where the lens cap has to go on. The objective lens has to be completely covered, and then you press a button and refresh it. And that has to be done every time that it's refreshed, and it has to be done by the user. Sometimes, like on the Trigicons, it'll tell you, what does it say? Nuke required, nuke necessary, or some
message will pop up and say, that you need to nuke your scope. On the Envision, it doesn't say anything, but you can kind of see it gets a little grainy, and it'll get some lines in the image, and that kind of lets you know that you need to nuke it. Now, the Pulsar's, the manual nuke, if you put it in that mode, is the same way. You got to close the lens cover. But if it's in semi-automatic mode, all you got to do is push the button. You can leave the lens cover open. That's the one that I typically leave it in, because I have had that screen lock up in the middle of a shot on automatic before, and that is not fun.
I leave mine on automatic most of the time. That is probably not common with the guys that hunt as much as Hans and I do. Most guys do go with a semi-auto. And to be clear, that's a terrible name. It's really, you and I would call it manual. I mean, because you're in charge, but you don't have to close the lens cap, and it nukes just fine. And what I'd tell people is, when you first get the scope, if it's your first time using thermal, or even maybe a brand new scope, and by the way, some scopes don't have that option. I mean, the FLIRs, you can't take them out of an automatic mode. But if you get a Pulsar or something, I would say leave it in automatic. For starting out. My reasoning is, you're just trying to figure out how to use the scope. Yeah. And that's just one more thing that you've got to think about and find the button in the dark. And so get used to the scope, figure out where all the buttons are, then start worrying about nuking it and when to do it and all those sort of things. I mean, it is a good idea. Hans is right. But sometimes even for me, there's a lot of stuff going on when I'm hunting, and it's kind of like I don't want to have to think about it, but it is a pain if you start shooting and that thing refreshes right in the middle.
It was just a terrible circumstance, really an unfortunate event, but I was not paying attention to the because it has a counter on the Pulsar. It's going to let you know when it's counting down to refresh, and I wasn't paying attention to that. I had a window of a shot, had to take it, and at the same time that I was about to pull the trigger, it locked up. And then, it takes a second to refresh. So, but
And
yeah,
that second
I
feels
agree.
like 10 seconds.
It feels like, but I do agree with Jason. When you first get into thermal, you first get your scope, leaving it automatic for a while, and get used to it. And then if you feel like you want to have a little bit more control over that process, switch it over to semi-automatic. But on the pulsars, I never use the manual, which is the lens close.
Yeah, there's no benefit.
Right.
Yeah. All right, let's move on. So since we're talking about refresh, now this is a place that gets a lot of people confused. Is we talk about this, and then we talk about the refresh rate of the scope, and that's something totally different. But you hear refresh and refresh, it can be confusing. This has really become, or has become, less of an issue and a talking point. Just a couple years ago, there was a lot of scopes that would be a 30 hertz refresh or a 50 or 60 hertz refresh. And, you would, to get a 60 hertz, you paid a lot more money. And if you still look at some of the older scopes that are out there for sale, like the Armasight Zeus line, FLIR has taken them over. I think FLIR's calling them the FLIR Zeus. But those scopes are actually, in technology years, pretty old. They're 4 to 5 years old at least. And they're showing their age, because those scopes came in both 30 and 60 hertz, and oftentimes to get a 60 hertz scope was $1,000 upgrade, and now almost everything is 50 and 60 hertz. Now, what that actually means, that refresh, it's the number of times that the image is displayed onto the screen that you're looking at per second. So a 30 hertz refresh rate means that image is actually flashing on that screen you're looking at 30 times per second. A 50 hertz is 50 times per second. A 60 is 60 per second. So what does that really mean in layman's terms to you? Honestly, nothing. Now, a lot of people would disagree with that, and it used to be a big fights over 30 versus 60. Generally speaking, in my opinion, if I hand you a 30 hertz scope and we're standing on the ground and you're hunting, and it's a true 30 hertz, you're going to have a hard time actually determining the difference in a 30 and a 60, because you can't move fast enough to see the difference. Now, if I put you in the back of a Jeep or a Polaris Ranger or something, and we take off and you're, looking like driving down the road, that's when you'll start to see, because the image is not refreshing on your screen fast enough, and so you'll start to get lag where you're moving too fast. And there are times, there are some certain situations where you might see that on the ground, but very rarely. In reality, at this day and age, it doesn't matter anymore. Almost everybody has gone to 60 hertz. Pulsar is at 50 hertz. That's just what they run theirs at. And I can tell you this, there is a 0% chance that I can hand you a 50 hertz and a 60 hertz and you could tell me the difference. I'm going to say maybe if you're in a helicopter. I don't know, because I haven't been in a helicopter with both of them and don't plan to, but you cannot tell the difference. So 50, 60 hertz, it's all good. I just don't want people to get confused of what that is compared to like the thermal refresh. And again, all it is it's the number of times the image is flashed on the screen per second. And that same thing is on TV screens. It's on computer screens. So it's it's something that we come in contact with daily over and over and over, but we just don't really put any thought into. It's just something that works, and we're not really aware much of it. Okay. Next, we're going to talk about the lens size and quality and that sort of thing. Now, it doesn't get talked about enough, I think, but the lens size is important on thermal scopes. And it doesn't work in the same way that a lot of people expect it to coming from daytime optics. And what I mean is a lot of people would assume that a larger objective lens on a scope even if it has higher magnification, is automatically going to equal a wider field of view. And that's not true. There's a lot of things that go into that, but it's not an automatic. Let's just use a real world example of, say, the current Pulsar Trail XQ38. It has a 32 millimeter objective. It's a 2.1 power optical magnification, and it's got a 56-foot field of view at 110 yards. So I'm going to go over that real quick. 56-foot field of view, horizontal, 32 millimeter objective, 2.1 power. You go to the XQ50, its big brother. It's got a 42 millimeter objective, so it's larger, 42 millimeters. It's a 2.7 optical magnification, and it only has a 42-foot field of view at 110 yards. So the higher magnification takes the field of view down, even when you go up in objective lens size, unless you go way up and get something really big, like a 75 millimeter or 100 millimeter. That's how you're going to get magnification as well as field of view. So I'm on a little bit of a rabbit trail there, but I want to say this, that the objective lens is important. And again, generally speaking, the larger the objective lens, the more that's going to help your image quality, assuming that it's a high quality objective lens. There is different qualities of these. These are not glass lenses. They're made out of germanium. And the reason for that is that germanium does a very good job of transferring the heat. Glass does not. It is not a good heat transfer. So the germanium does, and it transfers that heat that it sees to the thermal core. So germanium is a very expensive material, and there's different grades of these lenses. And what you'll find is, if you look down like at, say, the Envisions and the Trijicons, a lot of those have 25 millimeter objective lenses, but they still have the best image quality on the market. Well, there's a lot of other things at play there, but part of it is that is a very high quality piece of germanium. Okay. And so just because something's got a 50 millimeter or a 75 millimeter objective lens, that doesn't automatically mean it's better than an objective lens that's just a little bit smaller. You could say one's got a 75 and one's got a 50. Well, a 75 is obviously better. Not necessarily. You can't take it just at that face value. It may come down to actually putting those optics side by side and looking, because there are other things that can come into play there and affect that image quality, but the germanium lens is one of them. So without getting off deep in that, I would just say you need to be conscious of that, because unless you're talking about these super high-end Cadillacs like the Trijicons and the Envision, objective lens size is somewhat of an important factor. So just that's something else that can be discussed when you're looking for a scope. The very last thing and I know we've rambled on and I've talked a whole bunch, and Hans hadn't got to say much because I've just been trying to shove through this. But the last thing I want to talk about that does affect the image quality, and it's something that no one ever talks about, and it's nothing that you can really measure or find out about before you buy the scope without just talking to somebody who's used it. But that's the eyepiece quality, and that's something that there's three main expensive things on a thermal scope, and that is the thermal core, it's the germanium lens, and it's the eyepiece. Nobody ever talks about the eyepiece. But if something has to be skimped somewhere to get the price point down, a lot of times that eyepiece is a place to do it. And so they can put a less expensive or less quality piece of glass there, which thus, honestly, degrades the image quality you're going to see, because you're looking through a lesser piece of glass there. And it's not like any kind of a cheap, dirty trick. It's just a way you got to save money somewhere. And the thermal core has pretty much a set cost. And, germanium is expensive. So if you got to do it somewhere, a lot of times that's where it's going to be. The other thing you'll see a lot of times on scopes like the FLIR PTS-233 and the Pulsar RXQ30V, you'll see that they have a fixed focus on the objective lens. That is another place to save money. But I just wanted to throw out that we never mention it, but the excuse me, the eyepiece is an important piece of the equation. So that's basically a rough redneck explanation of all these different terms that you're going to come in contact to. I think we could take every one of those and we could flesh them out some more and we could talk about them. What I really wanted to do, probably not going to do it on this episode just because of time, we might get into it on another show, is how these things all play together. And, if you have 320 by 240, 12 microns, optics side by side, do they, image quality have to be equal? What can change? What can make one better than the other? And again, there'd be a lot of discussions we could get into and even make some side by side comparisons of some scopes that I can think of that, and how does magnification play into all that? But I think that's going to be another topic for another podcast episode.
Well, my goodness. Go take you a drink of water real quick.
I am. I'm out of water over here. My Yeti cup is empty. I'm out of breath.
That is a lot. Our resident Bill Nye the Science Guy, Mr. Jason Robertson, thank you for discussing all that.
Hey, wait a minute. Isn't Bill Nye a flaming liberal that thinks that the world's going to burn up if we don't kill all the cows? I mean, I think don't compare me to that guy. I mean,
you're the very conservative version of him.
Thank you.
The night vision thermal world.
Thank you.
But no, that's a lot to get through. But really, is just trying to break some of these terms, these thermal terms that are thrown around a lot, break them down to the smallest common denominator and the easiest to understand. That's really just being the first part of the buying process, is understanding what you're hearing, what you're seeing, what you're reading, and being able to translate that and make the best decision on when you're trying to buy a thermal scope. So I really, appreciate all that explanation.
I want to say this about it. I own a 3/4 ton GMC 4-wheel drive pickup truck. And when I open the hood, that is absolutely, that is just all Greek and black magic to me. I do not understand much about the combustion engine. I don't understand the electronics. You know what? All I care is that when I crank it, it goes and everything's great. So you can be the same way about a thermal scope. Don't feel like, I've got to go write notes and study all this. You don't. What you need is a good, honest, reputable dealer who understands these things and is going to be able to, point you in the right scope that's got the right features for you without even sometimes talking about all these. A lot of these are just things that they don't even need to be discussed. And there's scopes that I know are deficient in some areas, and I don't even bring them up. I wouldn't recommend that scope to you. Now, I might bring it up if you brought that scope up and said, hey, what about this one? But sometimes it's easier just to not mention it at all. And so the point is, don't feel like you've got to know how to take a thermal scope apart, work on it, and know what all this stuff means. Just make sure that, if you call somebody like Hans or I, we're going to be able to help you. We're going to be able to walk you through this process and it's the motto that we've been saying, and it's on my voicemail when you call. We try to take the confusion out of night vision and thermal optics. And that's what we're trying to do with this for the people who do want to understand, but don't get bogged down in it, because call us, we'll walk you through it. And once you get your scope, it doesn't really matter anymore. As long as it fires up when you press the button and you can go, shoot some coyotes and hogs, then who cares? And that's the same way I feel about my pickup truck.
Well, I'd like to talk real briefly about a couple things that we have coming up, and talking about pulling the trigger and making something go bang. We very soon, we're going to have on a gentleman by the name of Cody. And Cody is the head gunsmith over at Diamondback Firearms. He's going to be an interview for us coming up. I don't know if it's going to be in the next couple of weeks or so. We're definitely going to have him on the show. We haven't pinpointed the exact show yet. We're in the process of doing that interview. But I'm excited about having Cody on from Diamondback Firearms. I think it's going to be, this is our first show that we've had a gun manufacturer on, and what a great one to start out with.
I agree.
they're big fans of the show. They're supporters of the show, and really big supporters of the hog and coyote hunting community. So
Well, and
we're excited about having them on.
I've actually got my eye on a couple rifles of theirs, so I need to talk to Cody and
Yeah.
talk to him and see what it would take for me to maybe buy a rifle or two, because I was perusing their website and I was
Well,
like, oh man, I'm getting the itch.
They got a 13.5 inch, and Cody was telling me about it on the phone. A 13.5 inch AR-10 308, all black, and it looks beautiful. And so yeah, y'all need to go check them out. Diamondbackfirearms.com. They've got some great hog hunting rifles, some really pretty stuff. And they were talking about in some of their posts that they put, these are rifles for the blue collar people out there, the hardworking people out there that don't have $3,000 and $4,000 to throw around on a rifle. These are rifles that are good prices, fair prices, and they work. They are. I mean, I've got a 6.5 Creedmoor Diamondback. I've had it for several months. I've never cleaned it, and
Wait a minute. You've got a bunch of Diamondbacks, and as far as I know, you've never cleaned an AR-15 that you own yet. I mean,
I know. I hate cleaning them. So the 6.5 Creedmoor that I've had for several months. Shot a bunch of hogs and coyotes with it. Have not cleaned it once, and I'm going to talk to him and ask him about it on the show when we get him on here. So we will be having and talking about two guys. We love hunting. We love rifles and all that stuff, but I don't think Jason, and you can agree with me or disagree with me.
I agree.
We are not overly technical when it comes to rifles and that kind of stuff. We love guns.
We're not gun guys, but by definition, yeah, we love rifles. I love to buy them. I love to shoot them. But as for like reloading and talking about calibers, and I'm not a gun guy in that.
Yeah,
that's not
when people ask me, I tell them, I'm not really a gun guy. I have lots of them. I like to shoot them, but to me, they're tools, and they're not trophies or anything like that. They get used and abused and scratched up and torn apart, and so. But I'm looking forward to have Cody on, because there are some questions that I'd like to ask him, and I know they want to talk about some stuff that they have going on. Also, you and I are going to be hunting together in the next week. We've got we do these quite often, but we're going to have another. I don't want to say hog hunt, because it's probably anything that probably walks out is going to get something.
Yeah, and I was actually I was checking on some of the properties that I've got to hunt around here, and calling a couple guys, and everybody said, hey, we've got some hogs, but gosh, I've been seeing coyotes. I know you're after hogs, and I'm like, whoa. We got the Convergent Bullet HP and the new Sidewinder. Yeah. We're definitely not going to discriminate against a coyote. So I've got a feeling we're going to be doing some coyote calling next week when you come down. So I'm excited about it.
Well, like I said, we're not going to label what kind of hunt it is. It's basically whatever walks out in front that's legal to shoot.
That's right. We're
getting some itchy trigger fingers. The hog hunting has been good. Actually, before we started, I was late to start to record the podcast, because I had a group of hogs on camera that I had to go shoot. I was not going to let them go, because it was a camera that I haven't seen hogs on in months. And there was 10 hogs there, and was fortunate enough to get some of them. And so, yeah, it's been a good night so far.
I will say that this afternoon after work, I loaded up my 4-year-old on the Ranger and got a bunch of stuff, and I went down, and I've got ryegrass in my pasture that's 3 foot tall. My cows can't get it beat down or eat down. And I went down there and mowed out a big area and put up barbed wire and put out the pig pipe. So I've got that thing out, and I'm ready to I got to do that, because my grass is so tall right now I cannot see them. So I've got to get someplace that I can know where they're at, and be able to go down there and hopefully get a shot at them. So yep, pig pipes out, and folks, listen, we hope you enjoyed this show, and again, I hope you learned a little bit of something from a couple backwoods East Texas boys, and maybe some of this makes a little more sense to you. But if not, again, reach out to us, and we'll be glad to help you and make any observations and recommendations that we can when you get ready to buy a thermal scope or any other kind of night vision. Listen, thanks for checking out the Late Night Vision Show. You can find us on any podcast app. You can find us on YouTube. You can subscribe there. Also, thelatenightvision.show.com, just what our name is, thelatenightvision.show.com. You can go there. You can catch all the latest episodes. You can find out, can read up on Hans and I. You can find all our social media accounts, which, obviously are YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. And so we'd really appreciate if you go check us out there. And we just thank y'all for watching the show every week.
Yeah, definitely. Thank y'all for joining us this week. Like Jason said, go check us out on the socials. On YouTube, you can find Outdoor Legacy Gear on YouTube. You can find him on Instagram, on Facebook. You can find me on YouTube at Hans ETX. That's Hans ETX. And you can also find me on Instagram. Please, if you want to call us, leave a voicemail, text us a picture of a hog or coyote kill, you can do that at 833-4461. I knew there was a couple 4-4s and 3-3s in there.
Yeah, and that's only to leave messages for like feedback on the show, whatever. Nobody's going to answer it, and we're not going to call you back, or it's just an unmanned phone number. And
please, we are always searching and brainstorming for different topics. You can email us topic suggestions at thelatenightvision@gmail.com. That's thelatenightvision@gmail.com. Thank y'all for joining us this week. We'll see y'all next week. Stay tuned, because we're going to give you some updates on what the our hunt together was, and also, again, we've got the Diamondback Firearms interview. We'll see y'all soon. Y'all take care, stay safe in the fields, and keep making them bacon pancakes.